Is Larry Fowler. His topic is native plants in Sun City. About our speaker, Larry is a retired botanist. His academic training has been a BS in geology from Louisiana State University in 1967 and a BA in botany from the University of South Florida in 1974. Most of his career with USDA addressed protecting our country from the entry of more invasive weeds. He is focused on addressing invasive weed issues. Since January 2013, Larry has lived in Sun City with his wife, Donna. Both of his sons live in the Austin area. He is an Eagle Scout and served as an officer in the U.S. Army Field Artillery. Larry is currently conducting plant surveys in Sun City, and since 2016, he has led many plant walks as a native plant SIG leader for the Nature Club. Today, he will be sharing an overview of the native plants one might see along the nature trails in Sun City. Larry, you got it.
Okay, I'm assuming everybody can hear me. This is my first slide that I've selected. And before we actually get into plants out on the trails, I wanted to let you know how this all got started for me. This is a picture of my botany laboratory, I call it. My wife has consented to allowing one of our bedrooms be converted into a botany laboratory. So this is where I do my work when I'm not in the field. So one of the first things that I needed to do to get serious about learning the plants that are on our trails was to get a collecting permit so I could what's called ethically collect. So I was successful at getting a collecting permit from the powers that be at the CA back in September of 2016. And this allowed me to be able to take snippets or if need be, dig up plants, which I'm reluctant to do, to bring back to my laboratory to identify what they are, and then to put those into a database so I could create reports, which I was required to do twice a year. And here's some of the executive summary from one of the latest reports that I did, which was in January 2019. At that time, I had collected 224 different plants on all of the nature trails that we have. That number has since gone up to 300 and maybe pushing 400, I'm not sure. But today, I'm going to be, I had to select for this presentation just some of the plants that are on the trails. And so I selected these to inform you of and give you enough knowledge where you could take somebody out on the trail who may be visiting from town and have an interest, and to know enough to pique their interest and to appreciate the legacy that we have living here in Sun City. Not all retirement communities have the richness that we have of the natural areas. So we're going to be talking about the Texas officially recognized plants. These are the ones that have been officially recognized by the Texas legislature. Then we're going to be talking about some of the prominent woodies, trees and shrubs that are on the trail. And then some of the showy plants and toxic plants, endemic plants, and invasive exotics. So we'll start with the Texas bluebonnet. It's an annual. It reseeds itself yearly. And I've been blessed with having them recrop in my planter bed each year. And it requires a bacterium in the soil to flower. It's a rhizobium. So if your bluebonnets have had trouble trying to get them to bloom, perhaps it just needs a little native soil to get them started. It became the state flower in 1971, along with 5 other species within the genus Lupinus. It can be toxic to browsers. The flowers, and it flowers April and May, and it's considered an endemic to Texas with few exceptions. That is in southern Oklahoma, mostly because it's been introduced as roadside plantings there. But except for that, it occurs nowhere else in the world, but here in Texas. And that's the definition of an endemic. It's a plant that has very limited distribution, and it's defined as being endemic to a geographic area and occurs nowhere else in the world. So we have some of those that we've been blessed with here in Sun City. And I give kind of like a reverence to them because it's our legacy and it's to be appreciated for its uniqueness. Next is the state tree and nut, which is the pecan. Back in 1919, it became the state tree. It has some 500 unnamed cultivars, been widely planted and used commercially. It has a known allergen that you may be sensitive to. It frequents stream bottoms in bottomland habitats. And that's how it's distributed. So it's not uncommon to see it adjacent to streams and such as what we have here in Sun City. The wood is hard, heavy, very tough, therefore making it excellent for tool handles. And it has strength and shock resistance. This is got carried away here. This pecan, like a couple of other plants in Sun City, is botanical term is monoecious, meaning one house. That is, both of these sexes, the male flower and the female flower, occur on different parts of the plant, but on the same plant. So there's male flowers on one part of the pecan tree and female at other times. So I tell the story about growing up in Louisiana, and we had a pecan tree in our backyard. Well, technically it was in our neighbor's yard next door. And about every other year, we would get most of the pecans because the female flowers decided to bloom on our half of the tree over draping the fence line. And we always shared with them because technically, I guess one might say it was their tree. But that's the nature of the pecan tree. The state grass is the side oats grama. This clump-forming perennial grass spreads by rhizomes, that's underground stems. It's a very nutritious forage grass valued by wildlife and I guess cattle if you have them. It's common on Sun City trails during the months of June to November. Not hard to recognize because of the pendulous nature of the flower, the fruiting body on the stem called a raceme. Then we have the state plant, which is the prickly pear. We certainly have a lot of those around. I'm somewhat amused, if you will, of the great crop of prickly pears that we have growing in the median along 195 as you go towards I-35. And I just know that there was a bush mower that came in there and tried to mow those out and made the mistake of making a whole bunch of little cactus plants, because all it takes is just a portion of cutting off of one of these pads and you have yourself another plant growing. The pads, it produces a beautiful flower in the summer months, May to June. The stems are called cholla, and the pads are edible, and they're called nopalitos. And the early pioneers ate the fruit, which are called tuna, and the stems. The older stems cause oxalic acid poisoning. So let's talk about some of the trees. The dominant one in our landscape is the plateau or escarpment live oak. It's a white oak. It has no bristles on the leaf margin. We'll talk a little more about that. And it's susceptible to the oak wilt. It spreads by root sprouts underground. So in a mature setting, you may find several of these trees growing in proximity, and they're appearing to be separate mature trees. But if you were to excavate around the base of the stem, you will find that it leads to other mature trees nearby, which have sprung up through an underground stem earlier on in their growth. It is possibly a xeric or cold tolerant subspecies of the southern live oak of the antebellum South. Looks very similar, except for the habitat in which it grows. So it is thought by some that that antebellum South live oak tree that we have in our area, what we have is just an adaptation to the drier, hotter climates of Texas. Then we have the bur oak. It's a white oak growing in a wide range of habitats, preferring river bottoms. And in fact, we have a nature trail here that's called the Bur Oak Trail for good reason. And it has some beautiful adult specimens growing along the trail. They will get to, these trees will get to be 150 feet tall. Interesting tidbit about it, it takes about 35 years for a tree to bear the first crop of acorns. The largest acorns in North Carolina are produced by this tree, which are produced annually. Have to be cautious because the acorns, when they drop on the trail, are large enough that it can twist an ankle if you step on it as you're hiking along. And it has a thick fire-resistant bark. So here's a picture of one of the acorns. And you note the fringe around the cup. This is called the cupule. And here's the nut. And it's this fringe which gives the acorn its common name, bur oak. Another oak that we have is the shin oak, or the scaly bark oak. It's a white oak, commonly seen with basal shoots or suckers. When low growing and a thicket, is called a shinnery because the stunted tree will grow up about shin height, and if you try to walk through it, it can tear you up. This tree is common on the Sun City trails. And here's a picture of the shin oak leaf being a white oak. Notice that the main veins, laterals, such as here and here. You follow those veins and they don't extend beyond the margins to form a bristle like the red oaks do. And that's the classification of the white oaks. And why that's significant is that the white oaks have some degree of tolerance for the oak wilt, where the red oaks are more highly susceptible. And here's an example of a red oak, sometimes called the Spanish oak or the Texas red oak. Notice the bristles have an extension beyond the margins into these bristles, as you see here. And that's classic for separation to classify it as a red oak. It has attractive fall foliage. This will turn a crimson red color. The oak wilt is highly susceptible. The rare golden cheek warbler, it's endemic to Texas. In our hill country, depends upon this particular tree for food and nesting. And on all the trails common, we find the cedar elm. It's the only fall flowering and fruiting elm in Sun City. We only have 2 elms here. The other one does its flowering in the spring. The leaves will turn yellow in the fall. These leaves, if you were to put them between your fingers and rub your fingers along the top surface, you find that they're very sandpapery, and that the young stems, you see a little of it here, are winged. It is not deer resistant. And in fact, if you're walking along the trail and you see one of these low trees that's been severely pruned back by deer browsing, it gives sort of a bonsai effect with studded stubble stems and a high degree of this corky wing development along the stems. And the other elm that we have in our area is the sugarberry or hackberry. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the cedar elm, it is fall flowering. And I noticed that this past fall, that when they give the weather report, they often give the pollen count, for mold, grass. And one of the things that crops up is the elm pollen that some people are allergic to. And then the other elm is the sugarberry or the hackberry. Here it shows the fruit, which does contain some sugar in the thin pulp and has been used by our early pioneers to boil down the sugar that's within it to make sweetened dishes. It's an ornamental plant, very hardy because it's well adapted to Texas conditions. And here we have the trunk that shows the diagnostic protuberances that are called lenticels, thought to be, they're very corky, spongy, and is thought by some to be one way in which the tree can respire, that is to breathe. And here's the hackberry, sugarberry trunk showing these woody looking structures on an otherwise smooth trunk. So you can often recognize these, especially in the wintertime, because it's infested with the mistletoe, which is parasitic. Um, Seems to have a preference for the hackberry sugarberry. And I took an excerpt from Wasowski, which a lot of you are probably familiar with. She's an architect up in the Dallas area that's written a pretty standard textbook on landscape ornamentals suitable for Texas planting. And in this, she had sent about the hackberry sugarberry. If you have a freeze followed by a bright sunny day, the fruits ferment and songbirds wintering over have one very long happy hour. So let's talk about some showy plants. One of my favorite is the Mexican plum. And if you're walking along Berry Creek in the early spring, February to early April, you're apt to see this one beautiful, fully matured Mexican plum tree that's just filled with these beautiful white blooms, as you see pictured here. I've also seen it on the Tranquility Trail. It's drought resistant, and the fruit doesn't taste very good, though they look tempting. Of course, you want to catch them when they're mature. But to wildlife, it's a staple in their diet when it's in season. The bark here has this typical banding and scaling, which is typical of plants that are in this rose family. Cherries, plums, pears, and it just has that look about it. Another showy plant is this one here, which is the Maximilian sunflower. It's a perennial, sometimes forming extensive colonies from rhizomes. The flowers mostly September to October. Habitat is low moist areas and prairies. A good example here in Sun City is at along the Berry Creek Trail, marker number 5. We have an open area before you get back into the woodland, and just as you come around the corner, and there's a good crop of this native Maximilian sunflower growing out in the clearing. But it has to be at a certain time of the year, September, October. And these are colonies of flowers which are growing from underground stems called rhizomes. Another showstopper is one of the cactus that we have here. It's called the lace cactus. It's a perennial cactus succulent. Note the lacy looking white spines here in vertical rows along the stem. And the spines form a crisscross pattern. Kind of looks lacy, I guess, someone thought. It's tricky to spot when it's not in bloom. It sort of blends in with the surrounding grasses. So it is low growing and often overgrown by grasses. It's moderately deer resistant. It also grows in Kansas and Oklahoma. Other than that, it's pretty much a Texas cactus. And it occurs along our trails, the Tranquility Trail, the Hidden Ravine natural area. I've seen it there. It's on most trails if you look for it. But you have to know what you're looking for, and it can be easily overlooked, especially when it's not in bloom. Then we have the evening rain lily. Flowers one day or so after a rain, pops up in the landscape, showing this beautiful white blossom, which lasts 2 to 4 days before turning pink and withering, and then disappearing back below the ground and till the next rainstorm. Here you see some fruiting capsule here. And you can see how it withers. Once it's been fertilized, it no longer has the plant no longer needs to waste energy in attracting pollinators. So it will pull those carbohydrates back down into the plant for further usage at another time. So flowers May through October. The bitterweed flowers May to November. It's toxic to cows. Honey has a bitter taste. And I've seen it along at the Mockingbird Trail at marker number 61. This was a real treat to me and a new one until I started the survey and started looking. It's called the prairie pleat leaf. And here you can see the pleated leaf, not very sharp in this picture, but this is folded kind of accordion fashion. It's not all that wide, but this plant, the flower will come up on a single stem and display a beautiful blue blossom, which is so 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch across. So it flowers March to May. It lasts about 2 weeks. Each bloom lasts only 1 day. So the bulbs colonize over time. So we see one, you have to see several others in the same area. The bloom lasts opening late morning to 3 p.m., even on cloudy days. So though I consider this to be uncommon find, and you're not apt to see it most of the time you're out on the trail, it's because you have to be at the right time of year, March to May, and even the right time of the day, you know, for it to spring forward from the ground level. But if you're in the right place at the right time, you can be treated with the beauty of this plant. So where I have seen it for the first time was on the Mockingbird Trail. And as you're coming around to the connector that loops you back into the native plants, into the Hidden Ravine Natural Area, it's that general area where there is a colony of these plants growing. And here's one of our latest discoveries, is the Texas bluebell. It's described as a glaucous annual or short-lived perennial. Glaucous is a term which botanists use to describe the surface of a plant that has kind of a waxy looking coating that you can rub off. Cabbage is probably a good example of a glaucous leaf, how it has that kind of a waxy coating to the surface that you can rub off with your thumb. And actually, it's what it is a place that sets up a biofilm, which is has organisms that act to assist herbivores such as humans when we're eating cabbage. These organisms go to work in our gut to help us digest the particular plant. So it is three-nerved on the leaf. It flowers June to August. And according to the flora that I use for my identification of the plants, Shiners and Mailer say that it's one of the most striking wildflowers in north central Texas. In Sun City, we've only found it so far on the new North Point Trail, found in low moist ground. And here's another one that's not commonly found. It's the copperleaf. It is a lily. It has what's called an inferior ovary. Won't get into that. Single flowered scape. This is a scape. And so there's one flower on a stalk. It flowers are orange to yellow, July to October. It flowers after rains. And I've seen it in one spot on the Hidden Ravine Natural Area at the base of a clump of mature oaks. It's thought to have been introduced into Texas from South America by missionaries. But other than that, it would be considered endemic, found nowhere else in the world. And we've got it right here in Sun City. Another one of my favorites is the large buttercup. It's a herbaceous perennial from stout roots, has a toxic sap, prefers wet soils, stream banks. Largest of the buttercups in north central Texas. And I've seen it along Berry Creek Trail and adjacent trails. But once again, you have to be in the right place at the right time. It flowers March till June. And anybody venturing out on our trails needs to know about a couple of plants that are considered to be toxic. And everybody's heard of poison ivy, poison oak. It's, and you've heard the saying, leaves of three, let them be. So the leaves are highly variable, but the number 1, 2, 3 here should raise a red flag that maybe you don't want to come in contact with it because it could be poison ivy. It's got colorful fall foliage, and there's always controversy as to whether it's poison ivy or poison oak. And according to the flora that I'm following, the basic difference is the growth pattern. If it has a viney appearance, then it's poison ivy. But if it's more of an upright, self-standing plant, then it's poison oak. And that's all, I think, dependent upon the placement of the seed at the time that it germinates as to whether there's an available support or not nearby. But otherwise, it's all the same plant and it has the same toxic effects. You may have heard of poison sumac. Well, it's also very closely related and toxic as poison ivy, poison oak. It's not in our area. It occurs in the swamps out in East Texas, and it has more than 3 leaflets to it. So poison ivy does look like the southern dewberry if you're counting leaves alone, but the poison ivy has no prickles on the stem as does the southern dewberry. The southern dewberry is the one that looks like a wild blackberry bush, you know, and the fruit is edible on these for the southern dewberry, not poison ivy. Another one is a catnip noseburn. There's 4 species in our area. They all kind of look alike. They're upright. They have these stinging hairs, which are quite noticeable. It flowers in April to October. It's on most trails in Sun City. So the caveat is stay on the trails. As you can see from these hairs, they just look wicked, formidable. And all it takes is, they're very brittle, so it takes just a slight contact with human skin and they will break off. And it's got like a hollow shaft to the hair, which contains a toxic liquid, which then becomes like a hypodermic needle injected under the skin and can cause severe dermatitis for days on end, especially to those who are susceptible to the toxin. So it's out there. And if you're standing in low grass, I've done this on several occasions, and my ankle high portion of the leg is brushed up against one of these plants. It's like fire ants all of a sudden biting you, and you look down, you don't see any ants, but you sure feel the effects. So it's good to be able to identify this, you know, when you're moving into an area, to walk around it, give it its due regard. Another closely related plant, maybe not botanically, is the Texas bull nettle, mala mujer, which means bad woman, if I understand it in Spanish. Tread so softly, it's also called, and the scientific name is Nidosculus texanus. I was first familiar with this plant in Florida, where it's called Nidosculus stimulosus for good reason. I remember when I was just getting started with botany, and I was in Florida going to school for my degree, I would always be out in vacant lots and looking at plants or whatever I could find there botanically. And I ran across a young group of kids that were Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn-like one day as I was out in the field. And I asked one of them if they were familiar with this plant. And I pointed to this Florida version of this bull nettle. And they said, "Oh, yeah." And I asked, "Do you know what they call it?" They said, "Yeah, we call it stingaroo." Aptly named. So they walked around barefoot, you know, and shorts, and I'm sure they had an encounter with this plant several times. If you do come in contact with it, Windex or urine is what the literature says, can dilute the toxin and give some relief. So I don't know if people will have any Windex that they're carrying with them if they're out in the field, but the other alternative may be kept in mind when appropriate. Pain comes from a high pH of the sap. And it's recommended that you use Scotch tape to remove the hairs. And this will pull them out. Otherwise, you may be driving the hair deeper into the skin. The hairs can penetrate jeans, so wearing pants can be helpful, but it's not a Sure thing. Endemic plants in Sun City. As mentioned, an endemic plant has limited geographic or habitat distribution and occurs nowhere else in the world. So the Edwards lazy daisy is one that I see at certain times of the year. It's a low-growing annual of the Edwards Plateau. It's been spotted in only 18 of Texas's 254 counties. And we have it along our Mockingbird Trail. I know each year where it comes up regularly, and other places, but this one most notably. It flowers March through July. Another one is the Brazos rock cress. It's in the mustard family. Grows to 3 feet tall. Flowers April and May. And I've seen it on the Hidden Ravine Natural Area. It's endemic in only 22 of Texas's 254 counties. Then there's the pearl milkweed. It's in the milkweed family. It's a robust twining vine to 12 feet in trees, sticky sap. It flowers April and May on multiple Sun City trails. It has a foul smelling flower. Reticulate vein pattern on the petals, as you can see here. The parallel lines have connectors to the adjacent parallel line with a connection, as you see here, forming ladder-like structure. And in the center is what some think looks like a pearl. It's white, and what it is the structure that houses the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 staminal columns housing the stamens collectively at the tip, as you see here. And it occurs in only 15 of Texas counties, but it's limited distribution in the Edwards Plateau. Another one is the 7-leaf creeper. Most of you are probably familiar with 5-leaf version of this. Parthenocissus quinquifolia, meaning 5 leaflets. This one is Heptaphylla. It's in the grape family, and it's kind of like finding a 4-leaf clover if you find a 7-leaf one. Most of the time you see 5 leaflets here. And this occurs in only 12 counties of Texas. Once again, endemic to the Edwards Plateau and the Lampasas cut plain of Texas. It's a physiographic region which describes the area, the topography between here and Dallas. Said to be less invasive than the Virginia creeper, the 5-leaf version, due to lack of adhesive disc at the tip of the tendril. So it's very colorful in the fall, turning a crimson color. And it's said to attract seed dispersers. April through May. And so here's some of the non-native, exotic, invasive plants that we have in Sun City. And I'm pleased to say that in my studies, we really have no serious invasive weed problems here. Our natural areas are not pristine, but they've been pretty well left intact. And a lot of the native landscape flourishes. But this is the Chinaberry. And it's a deciduous native tree to China and India. It's in the mahogany family. It's introduced into the United States in the mid 1800s as an ornamental. And you can see it does have ornamental qualities to it, the beautiful blue colored flowers and the golden colored fruit. The bark is, the fruit is toxic as well as other parts. The bark is used as an emetic and to expel worms. The seed is hard. It is used to make rosary beads, but it's very foul smelling, as I can attest, and that's something you want to really handle. It's cultivated and escapes into the floodplain forest. For instance, I'm thinking along Berry Creek, I've seen it, and the Tranquility Trail. I've seen it in the river bottom areas adjacent to Berry Creek. Another one you're probably all familiar with is Nandina. The berries are toxic. It's native to Eastern Asia and India, introduced as early in the early 1800s. It displaces native species, disrupting plant communities. Spread by birds, of course, they're attracted by the fleshy red fruit, which they will spread around. And it's widely planted as an ornamental, but if you're somebody in the market for shrubbery, I would suggest going with native plants and staying away from some of these exotic invasives. Another one is bastard cabbage. It's an annual introduced from the Mediterranean region where it's native. It grows in disturbed soils, and I remember seeing it in my greenway when I first moved here about 9 years ago, and it popped up, and I said, oh no, not my greenway. So I went out there with a garbage can, and it enticed several of my neighbors to join me with their garbage cans, and we swept that entire greenway. It was a new housing development, and it was still very disturbed new soil. And this bastard cabbage was looking to find a new home, which we deprived it of, and were quite successful at eradicating it from our landscape. So we caught it early on. It was flowering, but had not gone to seed yet, evidently. And we removed it quite easily. And then we have the Malta star thistle. It's annual to Europe. First collected in Texas and Bayer County in 1934, so it's a fairly recent arrival. It grows in disturbed calcareous soils, such as what we have a lot of here in Sun City. It's common on our Sun City trails. Although it does have a beauty to it, flowering July to October, it's still a foreign invasive and uninvited to the landscape, our native landscape. Getting toward the end here, KR blue stem. If you're a rancher or a farmer, you know this plant. This is the King Ranch, or KR blue stem. It's a perennial grass becoming rhizomatous or stoloniferous with mowing. So you don't want to get rid of it by mowing over it. It just makes more of it. It's native to Asia. It crowds out native vegetation. It's not very nutritious if you're a rancher. And the flowers made in November. And these stalks produce kind of a purple look to them when seen at a distance. So that's pretty much it for my presentation. We've talked about the trees and shrubs, officially recognized plants, showy plants, toxic plants, endemic ones, and a couple of the invasive exotics. So if we have time, I'm open to any questions.
Well, you know we have questions, Larry. Y'all, if you haven't had a chance to write a question, go ahead and put it in the chat area down at the bottom, And then we'll ask it toward the end, because Jackie Hunt asked the first question, and she wanted to know something that I just lost here. Hold on. We'll just go right on up there until we get to it. She was asking, is the lacy bark cedar elm similar to the regular cedar elm? She said she plans to put one in her front yard this winter. Do I need to keep the deer away until it gets bigger?
Okay, you want to plant another type of elm?
It's the, oh, okay.
What was the question? I'm trying to understand.
Oh, she wanted to know, is it similar to the regular cedar elm? She's putting a lacy bark cedar elm.
Okay. I'm not that familiar with the lacy bark cedar elm. Cedar elm, of course, is native and well adapted to our habitat here. I would ask a nurseryman, especially one that deals in native plants, as to growth habits, characteristics.
Okay. Would deer, do they like to eat the regular cedar elm?
Yes, they do, and I think I mentioned in the
I think you
presentation
did.
that they will catch it in its early stages and nibble off the young foliage to the point where it looks like it is a bonsai plant with short, stubby growth, many branches. So
Right.
it's not deer resistant until it gets to a certain age of maturity.
Okay, and I think probably it's true that many plants or small trees, when they're first put out, deer love to nibble them. And so it's probably good, if you can, to kind of protect them.
Yes.
What Sun City Trail do you think has the most flowers?
Oh, let me search my mental database here. I would like to interject this at this point. There's no trail that I think doesn't have its uniqueness and its own set of wildflowers and beauty. And it's always a great day to be in the forest. There's never been a day that I've been out on the trails that I haven't been surprised with some new plant breaking surface, grabbing my attention, saying, look at me, look at me. And I have, for the plant walks that I've done over these last 4 years, I was giving 2 walks a month. And in preparation for these walks, I would pre-walk the trail and write down anything worthy of note that I would want to pass along to those on the field trip. And I was just always surprised that it may have only been 2 or 3 days prior that I had walked that same trail that didn't see this new plant that I had seen. So the landscape is constantly changing. And but in answer to your question, I would say that there's no trail that is really lacking wildflowers. Of course, springtime is always a good time to be on the trail. And I would say that Berry Creek Trail certainly has its share of wildflowers. The Mockingbird Trail has its share of wildflowers. The Tranquility Trail, I could go on and on. It's hard to draw a line which one is the most. But I'll just leave you with, if you decide to get out on any of the trails, you we'll find wildflowers most any time of the year.
That's fantastic. What kind of milkweed do monarch butterflies like? Do they like that one that you talked about, the pearl milkweed?
Uh, the milkweed that we have here, no.
Probably not.
We do have some milkweeds here that they like. One is the buffalo horn.
Antelope horn?
Pardon?
Antelope horn?
Yes,
Yeah.
right. We want to be especially protective of our milkweeds because of the monarch butterfly. And it may have a liking more so for some milkweeds over others. But I think that any milkweed is probably fair game for the monarchs.
Right, and if we have, usually in the spring, we will have a plant sale through the Horticulture Club, and we try to have a lot of natives there, and I don't know if we're gonna have it this year or not because of COVID, but the Native Plant Society also brings plants to the farmers market I think they're planning on doing it in the spring. So they will also have milkweeds that are popular for the monarchs. So if you we'll keep keep our membership posted so they'll know about those, and that'll be good in case they want to acquire some for their own property.
Sure.
There's a question, is prairie pleat leaf related to blue-eyed grass?
The pleat leaf celestial that I talked about, is it related to the blue-eyed grass? Maybe the blue-eyed grass is in the iris family, and the pleat leaf, is in its own plant family. So botanically, it may not be considered to be very much alike, but the blue-eyed grass is a small little plant that has its own beauty about it. But I really like the blue celestial that we have here and
Okay.
its uniqueness.
Well, as you can tell, Larry loves every plant and flower. And we have just a couple more questions. We're going to try to get to them because I know everybody is probably, got to go about their business, and they have they have such active social lives now. Anyway, but somebody asked, will slides be available? And of course, we're going to put this whole, we've been videoing this, and this will be on YouTube with the slides. So if that's what Barbara meant.
My PowerPoint presentation would be my slides, and that is certainly being made available to the Nature Club. I think it's in a format which is amenable to YouTube, and I would be flattered to have that done. My two sons and their wives are saying, "Dad, as soon as you get the link for that, give it to us. We want to see your presentation."
Well, great. It'll be there hopefully by tomorrow. There's a question, is the wood from the tree in the mahogany family good for furniture construction or other woodworking usages?
I've not heard of it being used as such, and my thinking is probably not.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more of considered a trash tree. It doesn't get of a size which would make it probably lumber material.
All righty. And Rivers is asking, where can I get the native plant book? I misplaced my 2 copies. And I'm thinking that they probably mean the native and adaptive plant book. And that is sold by the CA at the monitor's desk for $2. And so I do know that it's available there. And we might actually have copies of that when we all, maybe our first time all back together, when we can actually be there in person. We might even have some copies there to give away if you needed one. So that's a possibility. But let's see, has anybody else got any more questions? I know that Larry loves every plant, and we have really appreciated this. It's been just great. We want to thank you so much, Larry, for doing this for us.
It's been my pleasure.
That's wonderful. Do you know if your replacement is here today?
Pat Guerin is his name, and I haven't had a chance to search.
Pat, if you're there,
Oh,
I wonder if he is.
I'm
Well,
looking
while we go ahead and,
there he is. Yeah,
is he?
he's there.
oh, wonderful.
He's waving now.
Okay, so
Hey,
Pat,
Pat, glad you could join us.
okay, I
And
don't
we'll
know
be
if y'all can
working-
all, probably y'all can't all see Pat, but we just want to let you know Pat Guerin is going to be his replacement, and we're going to be out on the trails with him, looking at native plants, and I'm sure Larry's going to be leading us from afar or anear. So thank you very much. And now, Bill.
Larry, thank you for your interesting program on our native plants. The Nature Club gives special recognition and appreciation to Larry Fowler, who after many years of service is retiring as the SIG leader of the Native Plant SIG. Larry has said he plans to remain active in the Nature Club. Thank you, Larry, for all that you have done for the Nature Club. Our next Nature Club Zoom meeting next month is on